All right. Hi. Hi,
Hey
everyone.
there.
Hi, Alina. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you doing?
Doing great. So ready to talk to you about this, thought-provoking, very contentious topic that we chose. Let's probably answer the main question here. Why did we choose the topic? So why are you interested in talking about it?
Well, first, I think
We
that
have
there
to
is
announce the topic or
oh, right, definitely. Right, sure. The topic is vocabulary overrated, right? Or what fluency is really about.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry for cutting you off. Keep going.
So I think that there is this trend among students and honestly among teachers, especially those who are promoting themselves on social media, to treat vocabulary as something of utmost importance.
Mhm.
And it's some kind of a holy grail of learning English, of teaching English. Vocabulary is king, all right? It's your key to fluency. But is it? That's the
Yeah,
question.
question that we're going to try to answer today, I think. So, how do you feel about it? What is your take, speaking in general terms?
Well, definitely it is one of the most important parts of your path, right, of your way to this C2 level, if
Mm,
there is some kind of end to this level, which I'm not sure about. So I do not deny that. But I think it is overrated by students as a thing per se, right? As vocabulary. They usually say that vocabulary equals fluency. And that is something
mhm.
I do not agree with. What do you think?
Oh, I'm definitely on the same page with you. I would add that, you know, words are important and they are specifically important when you want to consume native content. You need to know a lot of words, big ones and small ones, you name it. But when it comes to speaking, I think the most important factor that gets overlooked is, collocations and becoming sort of the master, the wordsmith with the most common words. That is the part where, in my experience, most students sort of the part that they struggle with the most because having a conversation is about being able to sort of like navigate around the rough edges, right? It's about being able to come up with something else on the spot while you're drawing a blank and you can't think of a word you were trying to think of, right? Like it's on the tip of the tongue, but you can't really grasp it. It's out of your reach, but you have like this wide range of other possibilities, other means to express yourself.
Right, absolutely. Because it doesn't boil down to vocabulary, right?
Hmm.
So there are some grammar structures that you can use. There are more common words that you can use in your speech and you can implement them into your everyday speaking practice. But I've been thinking that students usually come with this kind of request. I want to expand my vocabulary. That's what they say.
Hmm.
But what do you think they really mean when they say it?
Honestly, I think they get intimidated by all of these social media, presence of teachers specifically that are, in order to promote themselves, they are pushing this narrative that these are the words you don't know again. And, people feel like it's never ending, which it is. Like, it never really ends, this journey of learning vocabulary. There's always more. And just when you think you've covered it all, there's something right around the corner. But I feel like people just fall into the trap of thinking that those high level words, which are labeled, a certain level pretty arbitrarily, in my opinion, are the be all and end all of language learning, when in fact, it's more about clarity, getting your message across, precision, discourse management, things like that. Though it's more about communication. And for some reason, we keep forgetting that at the core of language learning is communication, right? It's not about showing off and flaunting all of the fancy words you've learned having studied for quite some time. It's about making sure that the person on the other side actually understands what you're trying to say, where you're coming from.
I also think that apart from this thing that they are like dissatisfied, right, with number of words they see on the internet every day and they do not know and they kind of feel not enough, they also come with this request because they want to use fancier sounding words. That's another trap. And in this exam prep world, there is this, I think it's already a meme with this word. The word is plethora. I
Plethora,
mean,
yeah.
students love that, right? And teachers hate it. But they kind of cling to it because they think it sounds so fancy and so cool and so precise. But in fact, it doesn't, even in academic writing. It's something which is too much, right? Over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is how to start filling the vocabulary, how to make it yours, right? How to stop chasing this fancy vocabulary.
Yeah, that is sort of a tough nut to crack, I would say, right? It's for some reason people think that you can sort of like attack it and, take it by force in a way, like you practice it 1,000 times and you just get it. But the thing is, like flashcards, for example, are extremely popular these days. Spaced repetition, like people are talking about it left, right, and center. But the thing is, you can't possibly fit all of the variety of context that the word comes in natural language on a flashcard. You can probably add like 3 sentences to help you out, which is better than nothing. Remember back in the day, it would be just a word and a translation, which is crazy. It's just memorization. But still, you need more than that. Paul Nation, I'm not sure if you know of this guy. He basically studies vocabulary acquisition in a second language. He says that sometimes you need up to like 30 different sentences, the different being the operative word. Realistically, you just have to expose yourself to the language more. And that's how you start feeling that plethora is, in fact, a very formal word used in only certain contexts. And it sounds totally out of place if you pronounce it most of the time outside of very specific domains. If you are a scientist given a lecture, maybe it might come up, but there's a reason it's not the most commonly used word, right? It doesn't really come up.
Shall we speak about words which are more common and less common then?
Oh, definitely. So what is your take on that? Do you think that we place too much emphasis on certain words, over exaggerate their importance because we're chasing this like unattainable goal of sounding fancy?
Even though the words are not that widely used, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had this conversation with my husband. My husband does speak English, but he's not a teacher and he's not very advanced. But my surname is actually his surname.
All right.
We had a talk about a week ago, and he asked me like, "Do you know what leech means in D&D games?" And I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm not into board games. What are you talking about?" And he was like, "Well, that is actually the body, dead or alive." And I honestly, I was shocked because I have never encountered that word before. And I said, no way, it should be very outdated. Nobody uses
Mm-hmm.
that. He said, well, in D&D, people do. And I Googled and I looked for some dictionaries and I found this word. And I thought, oh man, I took his surname. And now I have this glitch in my surname. But I'm actually not really worried about that because who cares? No one uses that word in real life.
Yeah, it's so weird with words like, especially slang. Like, come to think of slang, and it's like you can't really keep up with that because you just need to choose a subculture that you belong to and kind of like absorb it because there's no way you can like learn it from a dictionary. And probably with this word, like a certain group of people might use it, but again, it's very niche, right? So how do we differentiate between like what always boggled the mind for me is the fact that, if you go to say Cambridge Dictionary, right, there are certain words that are labeled C2, but in reality, they are like one of the most commonly used words. Is it a bit misleading in your opinion? Because I feel like it's just like, why are we learning the names of different colors and animals and stuff like that when in reality, words like, economy, resolve, accomplish, things like that are a lot more common in the language? What's your take on this?
I actually think that most of these words come naturally to students, and they use these words with kind of ease because most of them are Greek or Latin, and
Mhm.
that's what they have in their native language. And that's actually a good thing. What I mean is that students need to learn how to be happy with the fact that they are already touching that C2 level, that they are already
Right.
into this kind of proficient speaking, even though they are A2 level, but they know how to say economy, and that's great. They should take it into account and they should consider it a milestone, I guess.
Mhm.
That's a great thing.
Yeah, but also what I struggle with here is like I can't wrap my head around it because, technically these are the words that you are supposed to showcase, for example, if you're taking an exam, when in real life it turns out that these are quite commonly used words. And if you expose yourself to the language enough, it seems like it would come naturally. And the fancy words become those that you don't really see used in articles or movies. Those are things, as you have mentioned, like your surname story or just some day-to-day items, things like ladle or colander. I think it has also become a meme on Instagram where people are like, I've been learning English for 20 years and I was today years old when I found out that, I don't know, this is what something means.
Absolutely. I also think that we should promote some dictionaries which expose this usage thing, right? How commonly
Mhm.
this word how common is this word? And one of my favorite ones is Collins Dictionary because they always have this kind of scale, right? Of
I
how
think
common.
dictionary, all the vocabulary news series is based on working in conjunction with one another, right?
Oh, probably.
I
Probably not.
about that one, I think they're using some sort of a corpus where they have figured out that these words have been labeled a certain way based on frequency, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. I think it can be a revelation for many students. And when they just, open this page with this word, they see the word and they see like not used at all. And yeah, that's amazing. They can skip it. Why would you spend your precious time trying to learn that word when you're never going to use that in your life?
Yeah, when you know that it's in the 30,000th percentile, and you know for a fact that a native speaker's vocabulary is like, I don't know, like if they're educated, probably, I don't know, maybe 40,000 words. You have to spend a lifetime reading to get there, I think, right? Because it's not just individual words. You might have a receptive vocabulary that is huge, talking about passive and active vocabulary a little bit, right? But it doesn't mean that you can use all those words. It would be an unrealistic standard to sort of like hold yourself to.
But you know what I was thinking about? That sometimes people sound very intellectual and very clever in their first language. And that's also an option here. When you make English your second language, you are basically open to sound intellectual as well. And if you want to stick to this weird, not common vocabulary, go ahead. But just, make sure that you want to sound like that. Make sure you realize what you
Mhm.
say.
I think you made an amazing point here because that's basically how I feel about it. I always say that before trying to drum the words into your mind by memorization, spaced repetition, whatever, you need to realize that for you to be able to use those words, even if you are already intimately familiar with them, a thought has to occur in your brain, right? Like without this idea, there's nothing to express with words. So, like, there's nothing to verbalize. So, if you are, as you are saying, intellectually inclined, constantly reading, you are sort of absorbing the knowledge in that language. And those words become a part of you. You internalize them because you're interested in whatever it is you're reading. And it becomes natural for you because you're having those thoughts and you need some precise words to help you express yourself, get your message across. Whereas if you're just trying to drill the words, it's not going to work because the ideas are not there.
You should realize why your speech sounds like that. If you really want to sound like that, or is that just vocabulary popping up and you do not pay a lot of attention to it or don't put much effort into it, right? Or thought, and you just sound weird because your speech does not have the same tone or register at the beginning and at the end of your sentence. How can you, you know, use y'all and plethora in the same
The same
sentence? I
sense,
mean,
yeah, within the same breath.
absolutely. Isn't that weird?
And that's how a lot of people end up sounding, unfortunately, because some students are mistaken that, for example, when they're taking an exam, the idea is to flaunt all of the words that you could possibly come up with, which is not the case. Even my attitude to exams, I'm not really a huge fan, but still, I have to give it to them. They're not the most stupid people on earth, so they know what they're doing and they're giving you like 16 minutes for speaking. It doesn't mean that you have to use all of 20,000 words, it just means that you have to sound natural, appropriate. Yeah, it has to be, you have to show that you're able to navigate the discussion. It's not about the words per se.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually mentioned this thing that if a person reads a lot of academic texts or whatever, and they start speaking using the same word, I think it leads us to the question and to the topic of noticing
Oh, yeah.
and how noticing, yeah, how important it is.
It's crucial. Honestly, I've been using, let's circle back in a way. It's a flashback of my life. I've been using spaced repetition religiously for the last 10 years. The main effect, which I've come to realize only recently, I think comes from noticing. When you're actually sitting down to review your flashcards, we can talk about active recall. It also helps, all of that, but just sitting down and focusing and paying attention. And if you have a gapped sentence, even better, right? Like, so you have to actually sift through your mind and be very mindful of grammar that surrounds this word for you to be able to come up. So I think noticing is absolutely key. It's like you can listen to a YouTube video on playing on the back in the background and pay absolutely no mind to all of the unknown words that come up. Or you can sit down, use one of those extensions for Chrome, like language learning with Netflix, where you can click the subtitles and actually look the words up. You don't even have to write it down and revise it. If you constantly do that, you will experience the effect of that. What do
Yeah,
you think?
absolutely. I think that you still have to put some effort into this activity, right? Because just like watching TV, not paying attention to what they're saying or doing that occasionally, I don't think that's going to work in the long run. Definitely some words will pop up somewhere, but to make them truly yours, you
Mhm.
have to work a bit, right? You have to start this noticing activity and realize that, okay, I'm going to watch this TV show, which is about lawyers, and
Mhm.
I'm going to encounter a hell lot of vocabulary, which I don't know. And I'll have to work with that a little bit, right? At least a
Mhm.
little.
Mhm.
I think that requires some effort.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank God we now know a lot about cognitive science and it's sifting into the mainstream. People started talking about this depth of processing principle where You go on a scavenger hunt basically for different sentences and not just translate the word in Google Translate or something. And you actually analyze the context, different. Yeah, again, it's not a cure-all. You still need to give your brain time to create those neural connections. And you can, let's talk a little bit. I wonder what you think about this one. Let's talk a bit about people sort of like rushing things. I wonder what you think about this when they're trying to memorize 100 words a day or something like that. Because I have a lot of students that try to do that instead of taking it one step at a time, maybe 10 words and 20, but really work with it deeply.
I think we have to promote smarter vocabulary work here. So first, words don't live alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't learn just 10, 20 vocabulary items and think that they are already active in your language.
Yeah.
You need to learn chunks, right? Collocations.
By the way, yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but for anyone listening, this is coming from experience. I think Alina would be on the same page with me. I've tried doing that. I remember back in the day, I would try learning the whole dictionary. I would try looking up and learning every single word in my first ever book that I read. I think it was the Harry Potter series, and it was a disaster. It's basically like you toiling away and no result comes out of it.
Yeah, and your enthusiasm fizzles out, I think, at the end of the book or page, and you're so tired after doing all this dull work, which doesn't pay off. You reminded me, I recently opened this book that I was reading when I was 14 or 15 that was The Catcher in the Rye.
Uh-huh.
And it was not adapted. And I had this beautiful book and beautiful cover. And I opened it some time ago and I saw how many words were underlined by this
That's right.
teenage girl, and that was so funny. And I felt like I didn't learn them when I was 14. It took time to
Exactly.
implement them.
It happened to me the other day. I was looking for a piece of paper. I'm visiting my grandmother here in Crimea. Yeah. So basically, there was nothing here. So I had to go to like this sort of like balcony to fetch something from my stuff that she keeps there. And I found this vocabulary book there. And there are a lot of fancy words there too, which I was trying to learn like 10 years ago. And it took me a really long ass time to really get it and make sure that, yeah, now I can use these words. They feel really familiar, like they're part of me. But yeah, and I'm pretty sure if I really look, there are going to be a lot more notebooks like that filled with words. But again, like nothing, no context, just a word on the left, a line in the middle, and the translation.
Yeah, that's actually the reason why I like our courses so much because they are divided into these topics, right? And even you see that the vocabulary items you encounter there, they are not super topic related, but you can remember them according, like in the context of the topic. And that is amazing how it works. You shouldn't learn the words, which are about, let's say, food and which are only about food. It doesn't work like
Yes.
this as well, right?
How are you going to
You
talk about it then? You need other words.
Absolutely. And you can implement other structures and collocations and chunks which are not food related into this topic. And then there's going to be a magic folder in your head, which you'll be able to open
I
sometime.
think chunks are heavily underrated. And I think Michael Lewis, who came up with this lexical approach thingy, I think these days, now that we have, computers at our disposal, I think he was 100% right saying that about 90% or 80, don't quote me on that, percent of the, utterances that native speakers say are comprised of chunks. And nowadays you can actually check that. Sometimes I'm hesitant about that. I come across something that I find interesting. I'm like, is it really a chunk? Because it feels like I've never really seen that before. And then I go online, I check the corpus, and it turns out there's like thousands of examples of that chunk. even though maybe it has been used by, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use them all. You can't internalize them all, right? But still, like most native speakers just choose the expressions that speak to them in a way and they use it. So I want to ask you, how would you go about learning words that are considered more advanced, but which don't necessarily come up in native media and, authentic content that often? How would you go about it? Would you personally implement spaced repetition to sort of like artificially increase the frequency of the words? Because I feel like that's what advanced students are struggling with. And that's also part of the problem why they start overusing those words. I haven't really figured out a perfect way to go about it myself. The perfect one would probably be just spending another 10 years exposed to the language, but realistically, not everybody has so much time on their hands. So there have to be some compromises made.
I think they should realize what they really want from their language, what goal they're trying to pursue. If they really need to boost their academic writing skills, academic speaking skills, because there are people who are going to be professors in US universities and they need to work on that skill somehow,
Mhm.
right? That they cannot talk like people talk in movies because they need to think of what they're saying. Then I think that this kind of artificial work should work. It should be a thing. If there is no such need, why would you do that? I mean, only if you
Exactly.
want. Yeah. Yeah.
Some
Why-
students we have a lot of vocabulary at our course, right? Like the fluency course. And some students are intimidated by the sizes of the glossaries. Like sometimes it's 70 words or something along those lines, right? Like, and they're like, oh my gosh. I'm like, you don't have to use all of these words. Everything is just for you to get to, you know, get used to it. Basically, like it's okay if most of them remain in your passive vocabulary for the time being, right? You don't have to do that to yourself. And again, even if a word exists, doesn't necessarily mean that you are obliged to use it. If somebody says one thing and you're not that kind of person, it doesn't feel right for you. Maybe you are more emotive and you just want to say fuck you instead of would you be so kind as not to do it, right? It's okay to do that if that's what you do in real life in your native language. Yeah. So you kind of have to listen to your gut in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that many students do not realize that passive vocabulary isn't bad, right? It's not a bad thing. It's part of comprehension. They kind of feel that to bridge that gap, they
Yeah.
need to make it, but they don't,
Mhm.
right? It's just part of this path.
What is your personal experience with that? Because in my book, words kind of have to become passive for a while, sort of like stew there, simmer down, and then they have a chance to rise to the surface in a way.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And I think there is specific moment when they become your active vocabulary. And personally, according to my experience, I connected with my exposure to context.
Hmm.
And instead of learning fancy words or trying to make my passive vocabulary my active vocabulary, I just start learning what the context is. And then suddenly they kind of pop up, or I start noticing them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then the magic happens.
Yeah, I always get surprised, when I use a word that I know for a fact I never like intentionally learned. I mean, intentionally, not that I paid it no mind. I mean, I never put it on a flashcard or something. I still looked it up, I looked through the sentences and made sure I, understand what it means, at least in that particular instance. And then you just use it. It feels like magic, but I feel like you're right on this one. It's like you have these associations that work only for your brain, probably. Maybe like someone else has completely different ideas about this word and they would not have come up with it, but you do. And I always get surprised. Honestly, it's the biggest joy of language learning for me. Just being constantly surprised by your brain, almost taken aback.
Yeah, yeah. And there's another side of it when you listen to your students and you realize that they use some chunk or some vocabulary item in new context that you were kind of not aware of or never gave it a thought that it could be used that way. And that's such a pleasure, right? That people are learning and they are on this path and you kind of help them and now they can share it with you and teach you as well.
Yeah,
That's
happened to
that's
me
the neat.
today, honestly. I had this class, I think it was on lifelong learning, coincidentally. And there was this sentence, and the word terrain, like the area of land, was used in a very weird way. I for a second thought that it was like a mistake. And, students asked me, I was like, okay, is it like a mistake? So I looked it up in Oxford American Dictionary, and that particular meaning was not like there. They didn't register it. And I was like, really? Is that a mistake or something? And it was used as a synonym of domain, like, will you develop these skills in your journal? I was like, really? Because I personally haven't come across it in that context. So I was pleasantly surprised when I found it in Webster's dictionary. It's at the very bottom, but still it exists. I was like, please teach me more about this.
And here is this tip. If you have this word or chunk, look it up in many dictionaries.
Yes.
Use more than one or more than two, right?
This is going to sound controversial because people feel a type of way about this service, this platform, Reverso. You have to be very careful because they don't really cite their sources. It's not always correct, even the context. But now they have this dictionary, which I think is completely generated by AI based on whatever corpus or data it was trained on. And the thing that I like, but I don't rely on it for example sentences, but I think it's really good with determining the frequency of certain meanings. And it kind of arranges it. So the top one would be the most frequent one. And again, it also labels the general frequency of the word. And that's where AI is not just taking our jobs, but actually helping.
Yeah, it is helpful, of course, in this way. Well, I actually think I know what you're talking about, the website, I guess, but I can never remember its name.
Yeah, it's context reverse. So, and they
Oh,
just,
is it? You were talking about
yeah,
this one.
it's this thing.
Oh,
They just have like a dictionary there as well.
oh, wow. I think there is another one similar.
Yeah, I find it pretty handy. You can save each individual meeting there. You just start it and it gets added to your favorites. But I think they make you pay for it like $50 a year, which is kind of not a lot, but still, I don't like to be swindled out of money like that.
Yeah. I'm a teacher. I was taught to do that on my own, right? I mean, I know how to use dictionary.
Honestly, don't you feel envious of the current generation, so to speak, now that we're like old and decrepit? But anyways, the things that people like students that I have that are teenagers, have you noticed this trend? Like they come equipped with pretty decent accents already. You don't have to fix anything because they've been listening to YouTube for years. And they have all of those apps like extensions for browsers and stuff like that. When back in the day, I still remember how I had to, look words up in a paper dictionary and it wasn't such a hot mess. Yeah.
Right. You actually made me think of that moment when I think I was 16 or something like that. My friend and I, we went to this famous Moscow bookshop, which was, fully like about English and everything. And it was right after the new year. And I bought myself a present, and that was Advanced Learners Oxford Dictionary.
Oh my. Do you keep it on the shelf?
Yeah, I actually
Like
my dog
on it.
gave it a couple of bites.
Oh, so it's even more precious like that. Yeah.
But
Okay, so let's circle back to what we're actually talking about. So, what would you say about this like illusion of fluency? I think we agree on the fact that Basically, the more words you know does not necessarily mean that you're going to be flexible and malleable when it comes to language, right? So
Right.
it's more about chunks and collocations and knowing which words come together often and feeling the register. And it's not necessarily about numbers, it's not a numbers game. I recently read this book, which was on clarity in writing. It was mostly about marketing, but they were basically saying the same thing. If you can cut it down, if you can reduce it to the minimum and it still gets the message across, it's good writing. And if it's just verbose for no reason whatsoever, it means there's something wrong and people will not read it.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about it.
Vocabulary is kind of visible progress, right? That helps students to put it into their apps or write them like all these words down, and they can
Mm.
check it, they can feel it, they kind of um, feel this progress. But in fact, it's just kind of collectible thing,
Yeah,
right? And
I see where you're coming. It's like in Anki or Quizlet, you see those like thousands of words that you've collected, and it makes you feel good. But again, as we've talked during this conversation, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's part of your linguistic repertoire, so to speak, right?
there
Yeah,
is
but it
nothing too
makes you
bad
feel
about
so good. It's like, oh my gosh, these are my precious.
there's nothing too bad about that. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a cool thing. If it gives you some sense of achieving something,
Hmm.
sense of well-being in a way, why not? That's great. You just have to realize how to make it work better.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. If it keeps you going, because language learning at the end of the day is exhausting. It takes a lot of time, especially the vocabulary work, right? And if that helps, okay. If watching Sex and the City or Friends for the upteenth time helps, do that too. Yeah, anything to make it consistent and make sure that you last for years to come. I mean, if your goal is like proficiency, I mean, like if you just want B2, that's totally fine as well. Nothing wrong with that. Again, it has to align with your goals in life. And yeah, so anything that keeps you going, I'd say.
I also wanted to talk about your early relationship with vocabulary because you sound amazing, right? It's a pure joy listening to you.
That is very mutual, by the way. Not that like, because it kind of looked like I was like, yeah, of course.
I'm really interested in your journey because my personal journey started with music and pop culture, right? I was sitting with textbooks, learning something, but also watching music videos. There were no subtitles, but text available online. I was just, reading that, trying to understand that. And soon I realized that I can understand anything there. And the reason was because it was not about individual words, right? As we were talking about
Mhm,
that for
mhm.
that long time. But for me, that was about the context, right? And about the culture and historical background and pop cultural background. So, what
Yeah.
was it like for you?
Well, we really go back in time and analyze it all. I think I've done it all. As I remember trying all kinds of apps back in the day. There was one that was just like at the dawn of this like space repetition thingy called Learned Words. And it was like, yeah. So, anyways, I think I started to feel the real progress after I came back from the United States, where I had to face, the music, and that was the fact that I couldn't really keep up with the natives. I had to catch up real quick to be able to work. And I realized that the education I was getting in university was not enough. So that's the point when I started sort of like exposing myself to the language and analyzing it. And then utilizing space repetition. But the way I did it is a bit different. It's mostly, as you are saying, reliant on context. So what I usually do is I do it differently these days because now we have different corpuses and stuff, right? But I used to do it this way. I would write down a sentence where within the sentence there would be an expression embedded that I was interested in, and I would put it in Anki. And I think it's this technique that is called like sentence mining or something like this. And it doesn't mean that I will never have a sentence with the same word again. It means that I'm sort of like collecting different sentences. And it worked wonders because you develop relationships with words, and each sentence is sort of connected to a direct experience, like this first-hand experience, whether hearing it somewhere on the street from a native speaker or stumbling upon it while watching something. And it was very powerful. I don't think that most people are ready to do that because it takes a lot of work. So for, students, if they are dedicated, I can attest this technique is definitely gonna work. But yeah, and that's why I feel like it gives you a different perspective on language entirely. Because what I realized at a certain point is that you can know the meaning, like the definition of an of a word, like the individual word separated from the context, but you have no idea what it means within the sentence. Like, and sometimes even a sentence is not enough to get the meaning like properly. And yeah, so definitely context. You're absolutely right on that one. Nothing really works other than that. Everything else feels like, like mechanical memorization, and that's it.
I think you can see that if you're into comedy and you watch some videos on YouTube, like Saturday Night Live stuff.
Mhm.
And at some point, you realize that you do not understand anything because you don't get the cultural context, because all this stuff is full of cultural references. And I ended up Googling things actually. And I was Googling a lot and reading a lot as a teenager and then as a university student, like Googling, reading Reddit, reading forums. What is it all about? What is this joke about? And then I remember watching SNL and I remember laughing at something. And that was,
Just
the
like,
moment I finally got the cultural context. And, but that's a never ending story. You may know that cowboys say yippee-ki-yay, but you may not know why people are laughing because you have never watched Die Hard.
so I think you brought this thing up, which is very important. I think we need to say that it's okay to cut yourself some slack and not beat yourself too hard when you don't know something. It's perfectly normal. We all are different, and there's no accounting for taste. You can like video games, and I can be into Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And these are very different things, and they never match.
Yeah.
So it's okay, right?
And we can
That's
understand things from different contexts and we can understand them differently. That doesn't make us worse at
Mhm.
using the language, right?
Yeah.
It's
Remember when on social media, people like teachers, I think, started posting these like things like throw shade or like this slay, things like that. And I understand like these are very popular words and they come from drag culture, I think, right? Or something along those lines. But it's not like every native speaker in the United States uses those. It's a very like chronically online fraction of population, I'd say, constantly on TikTok. So I don't know, like it feels like sometimes, but we sort of inadvertently, by making like certain type of content, we inadvertently shame people into thinking that not knowing these are wrong for whatever reason, when in reality it's fine. Like it's not like you have to know what throw shade is, or what else is there, like for even like some makeup words like mascara. Like I remember I learned all of those in English because my friend was into makeup and I was forced into watching beauty tutorials for hours, and I was like, okay, but what mascara is in Russian?
absolutely. And there are still realms in your first language, which you are not proficient at, and you don't have to be proficient at them, right?
And we don't
So,
feel like imposters when we are not, right? Like, why do we feel like imposters in our second languages? It doesn't make any sense. Like, I speak, I don't know, basically, I sound retarded in Russian. Like, we were talking about it with Julia. She's like, I found myself trying to describe some sort of scenery, and the only word that I was able to come up was beautiful. And I'm like, yeah, well, isn't it beautiful though?
right. And that's totally fine, actually. So
Yeah.
it's, I would have to be flawless in every field you come across. I'm not very good at marketing English or IT English. I'm not good at Russian marketing as well. So is that a
Right.
problem? I don't work with marketing. Why should it
The
be?
only thing I know is like sell, buy, is not
Mhm.
scam these days.
Right.
Okay, maybe let's start wrapping it up, not to
Mhm.
make it too long for people. So, what would you say is your final message, like the main takeaway?
I would say that, answering the question that we are having today, the main one, is vocabulary overrated? I think it's not, but it's just misunderstood.
Yeah,
So
it's such
that's
a
what I
cool way to put it. Yeah. I love the personification of it all. I think that you guys, whoever is listening or watching, it's important to remember that communication is key and we are all people. Speaking a language is always about connecting on a deeper level. Even if you're doing it for a job, it's still there. If you could just ask ChatGPT to negotiate a contract for you, you would do that, but that's not a possibility because people like people and there's nothing we can do about it. So maybe let's be more humane about it, right?
Mhm.
And actually connect with one another. And it doesn't have to be with those big words. Again, learn them, but don't feel pressured to use them all the time. And don't feel like you're less than if you can't come up with something on the fly.
Oh man, you stole my line.
Well, I think we did great. I think it was an
Uh,
amazing podcast. If you guys do not like follow, subscribe, like, or whatever it is typical to do these days, yeah, I'm gonna hold a major grudge.
Thank you very much for this talk.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.